This is Terry Marie, co-author with Dottie Walters of The Solution is at Hand, the Dottie Walters story. Once in a great while, you get a chance to hear a very profound story, one that has the potential to change lives. The story you are about to hear is such a story. Here is my good friend John Harricharan with the Lesson of Professor Petersen.
It's a pleasure to see all of you here today. And if you thought you were going to find here a tall, dark, and handsome man, let me assure you that he is dark. And I did get into creative writing 361. And the very first day in creative writing 361, I met Professor Petersen. Now, Professor Petersen was from the old school. And then he said some of the most brilliant things I wanted to hear in that class. He said there'll be no exams. There'd be no quizzes. There will hardly be assignments. There will be discussions. But at the end of the semester, for me to give you a final grade, you will have to write a paper, a story, about 20 pages long. Any story you want to write. And I thought, this will be an A. This is the easiest A possible because I was registered for chemistry and physics and math and all those things. And so the semester went on, came to an end, and I had my paper written. To me, it was the most beautiful paper on earth. You know the saying? In matters controversial, my perceptions mighty fine. I always see both points of view, the one that's wrong and mine. And so, end of the semester, there is the paper. And I turned it in to Professor Petersen. A few weeks later, our grades came, and I looked, and there it was. Chemistry, A. Physics, A. Mathematics, A. History, A. Whatever it was, A. Creative writing, 361, D. Of course, Professor Petersen made a mistake. It was late at night, and he was grading these papers, and he must have gotten my paper mixed up with somebody who got a D. And the grades were transposed. And so I must see Professor Petersen and have him correct the error. So I went to Professor Petersen with my grades in hand, knocked on his door, and the gruff voice said, "Come in." And I went in and I said, "Professor Petersen, sorry to bother you, sir." I called him sir, because I was negotiating. I said, "Professor Petersen, I have a feeling that you made a mistake. You see, sir, I am an A student. And all my grades are A except creative writing 361. And Professor Petersen looked at me and he said, "What's your name?" I said, "Harricharan, sir." "Oh, yes," he said. "Oh, yes. What is your major?" I said, "Chemistry, sir." He says, "You stick to chemistry. Don't you ever write. Your writing stinks. This is the worst paper I have ever seen." He says, "Don't you ever try to write." He says, "And as a matter of fact, I should have given you an F, but I felt sorry for you and gave you a D." And I stood there, all shocked. Let me tell you something, friends. Every once in a while, and sometimes more than once in a while, a Professor Petersen comes your way. and you are faced with a choice, either believing Professor Petersen and going down into the dust, or rising up from the ground and going into trailing clouds of glory. And so that day, as I stood there and I reflected on what was said to me, I decided to go on. Remember Paul Harvey? Here's the rest of the story. It was years later. I had lost everything. We had moved to Atlanta. My wife was diagnosed with cancer, and she had died. And this one day, I love bookstores. I go there a lot. So, I was in this bookstore, and there were lots of people around the table. And I wondered, must be some marvelous, great book out there. And I rushed up to the table and joined them to see what it was they were looking at and buying. And there was this little book with a yellow cover. It looked like this. And it had a boat in it, and the name of the book was When You Can Walk on Water, Take the Boat. And there were reviews of this book throughout the country. Great things they were saying about it. It had won an award. And I looked at that book and I thought, wow, that's my name on that book. That was written by John Harricharan. And I did a very strange, symbolic thing. I picked up one of those books. I went to the cashier. I paid full price for it, folks. I get these things at discounts from my publisher. I paid full price for it. Didn't stop to take the change. Rushed into my car, drove the 10 minutes home, jumped out of the car, ran upstairs and onto the back porch, and it was evening time. And I looked at the clouds, and I looked at the trees, and I looked at the few stars that were beginning to shine out. And I lifted this book, and I said, Professor Petersen, Professor Petersen, you ought to see this. You ought to see this. Professor Petersen, I almost believed you. Thank God I didn't believe you. And so, my friends, when you find the Professor Petersens in your life, and they come in different shapes and forms and colors and sexes and heights and religions, and some of them may even appear to love you, when you find those Professor Petersens and they tell you that you can't do something, don't believe them. Because if you do, you have condemned yourself to a life of servitude to circumstances and to what others say. How dare they say anything about you when even you don't know that much about you? Discover who you are. Quality will flow from you, because whatever it is you are will shine so brilliantly in your work. Thank you for coming. It was a pleasure.